You're tuned to 1520 WCHE Radio, and it's time now for the Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will offer reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today, and now Sam Hankin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Avid Reader. Today our guest is Katie Crouch, author of Abroad, published in June by FSG. Katie's the author of the best-selling books Girls and Trucks and Men and Dogs. The Magnolia League is her first foray into young adult fiction. Abroad is a fictionalized version of the events that we all know about, leading up to the death of Meredith Kercher, allegedly by the monster of Perugia. Italians love calling their suspected murderers monsters, as they continually evoke God at the trials of those alleged monsters. This story, however, is told from the eyes, alive and dead, of Meredith, and although fiction, the tale is tied inextricably to the actual murder, the murder by whomever you want to believe did it. So, in my opinion, which many of you may be sick of hearing, Amanda Knox is simply a beautiful, goofy, now young adult who is caught up in a corrupt system whose stupidity and corruption is essentially beyond belief and almost comical in its incompetence and lack of due process. And also, in my opinion, it's clearly obvious that Amanda Knox had nothing to do with Meredith's murder. It's all too silly, in my opinion. And the investigation, chimpanzees could have done a better job. Well, so anyway, given my opinion, which as usual is unsolicited and probably extreme, welcome Meredith, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, although I definitely am not Meredith.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. Welcome, Katie.
That would be spooky.
No, well, yeah, you like spooky stuff, so that would be a perfect Alice Sebold thing.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure, and obviously I have very strong opinions about the case, which is still essentially ongoing. And while you were writing the book, it was as if it was over, and then all of a sudden, you know, because I interviewed Nina Burley about The Fatal Gift of Beauty, mm-hmm. And you attribute some of, I guess, your research to her and your acknowledgments as well. Mm-hmm. So, why did you write the book, and why in the fashion that you wrote it?
Well, I was living in Italy, and for a summer, and it was well after Amanda Knox had been convicted. It was during the appeal, and I had not followed the case. I was there working on something else, as was my partner, who's also a writer. And we were at a table in Italy with a lot of artists and writers from different countries, Europe and also South America. And the case is so well known internationally, and I actually knew nothing about it. But so the opinions flying back and forth were so different and conflicting, and I found that fascinating. And not only that, but people were very adamant. You know, either this American Amanda Knox is she's a she-devil Satan worshiper, to she's obviously been railroaded and all of you are idiots and you don't know the case. And
right. Which is your opinion, and it tends to elicit very strong opinions like yours. I find it interesting that you have such a strong opinion. Obviously, you sound like you read a lot about the case, and none of us really had, and it was a kind of a wine-fueled evening. But so I went back to our apartment and started reading about it, just to get a sense of what is this case, what's going on here. And I read Nina Burley's book, which is, I think, the best nonfiction book about it. There are many. There are, I think, 19. I have a list of them if you want to hear them. Do you? Well, give me 30 seconds, okay? Because it's fascinating. And plus, there's all the translations and what I consider the Italian trash. If you go to Google, there's 4,810,000 results you get when you look up Amanda Knox. Okay, I'm going to do this real fast. Yeah. There's Waiting to be Heard, Honor Bound by Solcito, Trial by Fury, The Forgotten Killer, The Fatal Gift of Beauty, Angel Face, A Death in Italy, Amanda Knox, A Story of Amanda Knox, Injustice in Perugia, Murder in Italy, The Monster of Perugia, Single Attacker Theory of the Murder of Meredith Kercher, Talks with Amanda Knox in Prison, The Amanda Knox Story, this is a good one, Culture Constructions of the Femme Fatale from Pandora's Box to Amanda Knox, Meredith, Our Daughter's Murder and the Heartbreaking Quest for the Truth, Finding Justice in Perugia, Amanda Knox, Murder in Perugia Story, Amanda Knox and the Perugia Murder. There's another one that's good, Not About Amanda Knox. I like that. Numerology for Amanda Knox, The True Stories of the Monster of Perugia, Walking with Amanda, A Death in Italy, The Definitive Account of the Amanda Knox Case, and The Monster of Perugia, The Framing of Amanda Knox. Plus yours.
My goodness. That's mine. Mine's a novel, so it's different. But yeah, that's pretty amazing.
It is.
I didn't know all of those. I actually stopped reading once I felt like I had a good handle on what what the case might be. I stopped sort of obsessively reading all of these books but I did read about 5 or 6 of them. I mean, the most, as I said, I love Nina's. The most heartbreaking one, which I couldn't bring myself to finish, was the one written by the father of the victim. And really, I think that the case is not. Anyway, I'll get to that later. But so all of the different aspects of it, I found very fascinating. Just the volume of talk, and so in being there in Perugia, I started talking to the locals about it. What did they think happened, and even their stories of different happenings in the case and different aspects were wildly variant. And it was just so hard to get a sense of what could have happened. But what fascinated me most was the people, or the 2 girls. These 2 young girls in a house in Italy. What could have possibly happened to have incited this international incident? So as a novelist, that was really fascinating to me. Not as much the case itself, because I'm not a forensic expert. I'm not a lawyer. And I'm not a journalist, I'm just a writer. But the emotional truths of what could have happened there just sparked my imagination. And I think that the case, it's funny that Amanda Knox is so focused on, because I really think the case is about Meredith Kercher. And her name gets very lost in this. In fact, in a lot of conversations, people say, what was the victim's name again? And to me, she was really the most important center of the whole zeitgeist. And Amanda Knox was sort of incidental. I mean, what happened to her later was certainly fascinating, that Amanda Knox, caused this huge media phenomenon. But the person most important to me in the whole happening was Meredith Kercher, which is where I think the voice of the novel comes from. And of course, once you start a novel, fiction is so different than nonfiction. This person that I created has nothing to do, in the end, with Meredith Kercher, because I didn't know her. I know something about her, only what I've read. But the voice kind of took on something of its own.
Yeah, it's difficult because you're writing about a murder case that is, in essence, I guess, still ongoing, which we can talk about, and you're writing from Meredith's voice in a fictional sense, because you are writing her words and her thoughts primarily, but her thoughts in many cases, because she's already gone. So yeah, it must be very difficult. But the crux, and Nina has a bias, except I don't think of it as a bias. I think of it as obvious that Amanda did not do it. There's definitely a bias there, and I think the bias is supported by facts. And then you also have a prosecutor who's essentially a convicted felon, and also semi-insane, who's already, he's sued Amanda for her book. He sued her parents for their interviews. The guy's wacko. Plus he's corrupt. And then the idea of being tried for slander at the same time you're being tried for murder, and the idea of God being invoked and the way you look being invoked, and the idea of picking up a knife with your hands without using gloves. All of those things are things that could never, ever, ever happen in an American trial. But the crux of the whole case and all of these books that I've listed, in my opinion, is this. If Amanda Knox looked like Betty Friedan or Rosie O'Donnell, there wouldn't be one book about her. Not one. And it's only because of Foxy Knoxy and books called Angel Face And the fact that she happens to have this beautiful, wholesome beauty and seems to be such a lovely person, in my opinion, and I'm expecting you to argue with this, in my opinion, none of the books that I read, not one, would have been published but for the way she looks.
Mm-hmm.
It's America. If Kim Kardashian didn't have the butt she has, she wouldn't be married to Kanye West. I mean, it's just America.
No, I think that, I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong about the media fascination with her because she's beautiful. I mean, we've seen this before. And there is something very, not only is she beautiful, but there's something very, she has this face that's very hard to read. So I think it's easy to project experiences onto her. And a lot of, people try to make her into what they want her to be. She does, again, I've never met her and I don't know her family. Certainly I've seen interviews with her. She does seem like a lovely person. From what I understand were the events of that evening, it seems illogical that she would have had anything to do with the murder. But again, I read a lot about it, but I do frankly think she's innocent. But as I'm not an expert, I just don't know. All I know is that I wrote a novel.
Well, you're put in a tough position because you put yourself out there on this one. Mm-hmm. Nobody else has done what you've done. So I imagine, just like Amanda, there's all kinds of viewpoints that you've heard with regard to fictionalizing this thing, I assume.
Yeah, some. There've been, it's because it's basically what it is a true crime novel, right? And so that's certainly been done before. And again, writing from the perspective of someone who was based on someone real also has been done. So I think it feels a little, what's controversial about it is that this person, this event happened, not that long ago, and the feelings are so fresh. And as you said, it's such a controversial media hotbed, so, and everyone, I don't know anyone that doesn't have an opinion about it, even though, people might preface it by saying, I don't know anything about this case, but, so I think that it's the reason it's a little, people are sort of like, oh, that's an interesting book. It's because it's taking a stand on a case that many, many, many people have a viewpoint on. And, why is it, you brought up a good point. Why is it so interesting to people? Yes, she's beautiful. And yes, they were young. And yes, many of us, there's something about living abroad that a lot of people identify with. A lot of people have traveled and I think have that experience of being a little bit off kilter or letting things maybe get a little bit out of control when traveling. And so, there are also a lot of articles saying, oh, that could have been me. Sort of preposterous to say, because we don't really, no one's ever going to know what happened that night.
Yeah, but the thing is, she's young, she's American, she's beautiful, and she had sex. And that's like she says in her book or in the interviews, if that was the mark of guilt, then we're all guilty. And but in America, no one would think that, except maybe Ted Cruz and Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh has actually said stuff like that. So it's like, when I look at the Italian system, it's the legal system. It's, as I said at the outset, it's just a system that seems so perverse to me, especially the idea of utilizing religion in a closing argument to attempt to, convince a jury that the person is guilty because of the way she's looked during the trial, the way she's acted before, after being slapped twice by the nitwit. All this stuff, none of it would be admissible, none of it would be part of an American trial. So I think there's lots of valid reasons to say, for example, to put you on the spot, and you've already said you don't think she's guilty. What do you think's going to happen if this comes back down? I think they're going to I think for publicity purposes and their own reputation in the world, that they'll say that, especially after a 300-page opinion, that that she's not guilty. But if they do say she's guilty, our extradition process, but for the double jeopardy argument, she would go back, she would serve 28 and a half years, and she would be released from prison when she was 55 years old. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that, and what do you think will happen?
Well, again, I'm just a layman here.
Yeah, but that's slightly
think
disingenuous. You've done an enormous amount of research.
From the legal experts I've spoken to, it doesn't sound like she will be extradited, because, as you said, it's such a publicity hotbed, and it would be such a huge thing for our country to do, to extradite her. The horrible thing is that she, even if she isn't extradited, she can't travel anywhere. I mean, basically for the rest of her life, which is terrible.
It is.
And yeah, there's no question she's gone through horrible things, and I think it's hard not to empathize with her. There is a lesson also, though, when one is traveling, we're not free. We're not as free as we think we are when we travel. And I think that there's a lot of hindsight is 20/20, and I believe I've heard her say, and her mother say, if only she had left, if only she had called her mother at a different time, if only she had called the lawyer. I mean, the fact is, I think sometimes, I can't speak for all Americans, but I know when I traveled as a young American, I thought I was safer than I was, right? And, as you said, she was very naive, and her actions, yes, this wouldn't have happened in our country, but Italy is its own country, and since we're not Italian, it's hard, a country with thousands and thousands of years of culture, and their legal system didn't just spring out of nowhere. It makes sense for their country. It doesn't make sense for our country, and I think it is hard for Americans to say, it's easier for us to say, oh, those crazy Italians, but I don't think that's fair. It really isn't fair. She was tried in an Italian court because things had happened in Italy, and it's very, very unfortunate, but we need to be careful when we travel. And, acting young in a prison, in a waiting room of a prison, of course she did nothing wrong in our eyes. I'm talking about she was 20 and she was nervous and she was kissing her boyfriend and sitting in his lap, and that in our country would mean nothing, of course, but in Italy, that's just so different. There are cultural laws, and they saw that as reprehensible, and those are things they won't forget even years and years later.
Well, even in America, if you go to the scene of the crime and you go, ta-da, or you do cartwheels in the police station, you would definitely be a person of interest, and you might be a suspect.
Yeah, and I'm still not sure that there were cartwheels. I think it was like she leaned over and stretched.
Yeah, who knows?
It's hard to get again, it's one of those things where it's hard to get the straight story on that, just like every single part of those 72 hours. Did she watch the movie with her boyfriend? Well, yes. Well, then he says, "Wait, I don't remember her being here." Everything, and the cartwheel is the same. Some people say she did a yoga stretch. Some people say she was doing acrobatics. The story is that's what made it such an interesting topic to write a novel about, because there were so many different aspects and viewpoints, and as I drilled down, it was really like a rabbit hole. I was never have I been interested in a case like this, but I just I happened to be there, so I could walk around and go to the house where it happened, and I actually went to the appeal because I was in Perugia, and I was in the courtroom and saw the circus, and it was a circus. It was incredible. Hundreds and hundreds of reporters, and they all knew each other, and they all socialized, and they would all party together. And Manini, the prosecutor, was very, very cozy with the journalist. He's actually, just watching him, I could see how charming he was.
Well,
There was
he's
sort
had the
of-
best. This has been the best thing that's ever happened to him in his entire life, and and continues to be. That's another thing that bothers me a lot. That this has been, without a doubt, the most fun, the best experience of his entire life. And there, Meredith gets lost completely, and there, Amanda gets lost completely. And you're right. I mean, Nina talks about that succinctly in her book about how everyone just kind of hung out, and it must have been incredibly crowded and sweaty and horrible.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was interesting. It was crowded, but it wasn't horrible. It was a real, it was a lot. Amanda Knox and Raffaele, they logged hundreds of hours in that room, and it wasn't always tense. It was actually intensely boring at times because there's a lot of pausing and there's a lot of just chatting, and it wasn't actually as dramatic as the news snippet sort of made it seem. It was just this long, drawn-out process.
And still
but that
is.
was, I wasn't interested in writing. I mean, the trial was so covered. What most interested me was what could have happened before the trial, and that's where I saw this sort of gap where in storytelling, because Nina's book and Candace Dempsey's book, which is also fantastic, Angel Face, which is more, it's interesting, but it's very sensationalized. That book by the Daily, just a little bit, the Angel Face.
Right. Yeah, I mean, those are the
it's sort of
titles.
written in blood on the cover. All of those, give such extensive coverage of the trial and, sort of when the girls came and different testimonies. But what there wasn't was, who were these girls? What was their daily life like? And let's remember they were only there for 5 or 6 weeks.
I know.
And so I really was interested in that and being a young woman abroad. And also what I was there for to begin with was Etruscan history and the history of Perugia, which is incredibly fascinating. And there's a huge trend, of violence against women. I mean, and I have that in the book. Throughout the book, there are these stories of based on historical fact. The Inquisition against the witch trials and the or the tradition of female sacrifice amongst the Umbri trial. Tribes, excuse me.
Yeah,
So-
no, I like the way that you date. I like the way that you date her time, and the times you date. The earlier times, the more ancient times. I like the way you do that because it kind of connects the two. It kind of makes it clear to the reader that there really isn't much difference in what happened then and what happened now.
No, I mean, it's such a small, it's a huge thing now, but it was such a small, tiny blip on the history of this place with this incredible, violent and rich history. So I just found that, as a storyteller, that was really fascinating to me. But it felt the whole time I was writing this book, I felt a great sense of danger as a storyteller. I mean, I have a huge amount of reverence for the families, and I stopped a few times because I would sort of lay awake at night and say, can I do this? Is this okay? And there have been some opinions that no, it's not okay. But the fact is, fiction is this art that I've chosen, and it is audacious. And the role of fiction is to do things that nonfiction writers can't, which are write from the perspective of someone that's not, alive anymore, that's not real. Yeah. And so, I don't want anyone reading this book and thinking this is actually based on fact. This is Meredith Kircher's voice, because it is not at all. This is a fictional character named Tabitha Deacon, and she's living in a fictional city named Grifonia. I use the case as goalposts, sort of rough boundary markers, because I wanted to recreate an experience. But I don't think there's any. You're not going to read this book and solve the case, right?
Right.
I mean, I think I'm sure you didn't think so.
No, no, I didn't, because it was like it was as if you weren't taking a stance on purpose, which I understand because it's fiction, but at the same time you had a preconceived notion, and you've done a lot of work, and you know, I put myself out there because it's easy for me to do. There's no consequences other than the fact that some people think I'm a jackass, and but you're putting yourself out there, and you have to like negotiate the Scylla and Charybdis kind of thing. You know, am I invading the province of a case that's still going on? Am I invading the privacy of these two families? Versus, hey, I'm writing a book. This is what inspired me. It's like in Japan, where they write, their fiction is sometimes based entirely on things that are happening in real life, and they just gloss them. And that's generally accepted as a form of literature. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is kind of like. Did you did either of the families read this? Were they contacted? I know it just came out. Did you contact them? Did any of that happen?
No, I didn't, because I didn't. It certainly was vetted by the legal
right.
The legal staff of the publishing houses it was published by. But because it's fiction, I didn't contact them, and I also feel that there's so much literature out there about them that I'll be interested if it even reaches their radar. A fictional novel based on something that's been so well covered.
Plus, we didn't even mention the number of movies and TV things, and
I know, I haven't seen any decent movies.
No.
I know there is a new movie coming out with sort of big stars this summer.
Well, and it'll be perfect timing because, well, no, actually, the case probably won't be decided for the last time until sometime in mid-2015, I think. That's probably what it'll be. And
yeah.
I think it has all kinds of repercussions beyond just the people like you and I were talking about. The reputation of the Italian legal system, the relationships between our two countries. If we violate their extradition treaty with us, do they then violate ours, and does it really make any difference? But the saddest thing, like you said, is that Amanda, who obviously loved to travel and would love to see the world, if she goes to a country that does have an extradition treaty, she's screwed.
Yeah, she has. Well, the saddest thing is the saddest thing about it is the death of this young British girl. But the saddest thing about this political problem is that Amanda Knox certainly is suffering. I mean, she's definitely been through a lot, and I do really empathize with her. Just having seen the interview, she seems like a really smart person. She's actually studying creative writing, which I think is fascinating.
And she speaks Italian fluently now, for good or bad.
Right. I mean, I really look forward to reading her novels. So yeah, I think that it's been really unfortunate, but most unfortunate was the fact that this other woman died so violently. I mean, that was another part of it, was that it was just such a horrific murder. And then there were also, all the other aspects of it, with the fact that, and we don't know, there hasn't been any clear reason as to why she clearly named the owner of the cafe she was working
I know.
in. And that, although I again empathize with being young and interrogated and slapped around, it's awful. But we have to remember this man, Patrick Lumumba, who I met as well. He's very accessible. He's a very nice man in Perugia, and he was ripped out of his bed in the middle of the night in front of his toddler and thrown into solitary confinement, not told why. And his business, he had to shut down his business, and his reputation is, according to him, and also according to his colleagues and friends.
Well, he also won the case and money.
Yeah, he didn't. So, but there were consequences to this, everything. Every single tiny thing of this spun out into this huge hurricane. So there were a lot of the victim. The person that lost most was Merida Kircher, because she was a brilliant young woman who died, but a lot of other people had terrible things happen too. But certainly Amanda Knox has suffered, and
If I had to parse it out, I would disagree with you, because
Okay,
because Meredith did suffer for minutes or maybe I don't know how long, and you don't know how long either, but she did suffer, but she died, and her suffering is over. The people that I feel the most empathetic for and the saddest for are her family, because one, they've lost someone they loved very much, and they have to suffer that for the rest of their lives. And two, they've never ever had anything like closure. And from listening to them, I don't know whether they honestly believe. I think they're torn also. They're not sure what happened. I mean, I'm sure it happened. The guy who killed her is in jail. I mean, it's pretty simple to me. But they're not sure, and they'll never get this closure, even after the final decision of the court. So I've always had a great deal of sympathy towards them.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean they're also I feel like this is the hour of suffering. They also are suffering. I mean, another reason I think that something that spurred the voice in this novel was the face of the mother, who I would see. I did not see her at the appeal because I had left by the time they came. I'm talking about the Kirchers now.
Mm-hmm.
Just the look of utter loss and the hole that this has left, in her life and the life of her family. I just something about that was very haunting to me.
Me too.
But I stand by the person that lost the most was Meredith Kircher. I mean, to be 22 and have your life ripped out of your.
Well, that brings me to a really interesting question, at least for me, is that I always am interested in epigraphs, and I'm always interested in covers and titles. But your epigraph, for whatever reason, you chose an excerpt from a very, what I consider, sad poem by Anne Sexton.
Anne Sexton, yeah.
Yeah, who had a very, very sad life, probably one of the most depressed people ever, and continually attempted to commit suicide and finally did. And so I wondered about that. What was your thought process behind using that as an epigraph? Because I really admire her work.
Oh, well, it wasn't her life, although I am fascinated by her life, Anne Sexton. My hobby is reading biographies about female poets and writers that preceded us, and the poem itself is, it's about young female passion and hysteria. I'm imbalanced, but I'm not mad with snow. I am mad the way young girls are mad with an offering. And the last bit of the poem says, "I burn the way money burns." I was really, when I was writing this novel, focused on that, because when you're 22 or 21, and I'm lucky enough to have been there. Now I'm 40. Or at least I was, and I remember being at the height of my sort of mental power, physical power. Certainly my passions were at their heights, but I didn't have the control. I didn't have the mental ability to control these almost superhuman. I mean, you're almost superhuman at that point. What you can do physically in your
right.
mind.
You're invulnerable, and
yeah.
and there's nobody that can give you any advice, whether you're 40 or 60. You can't tell.
Right. No one can give you advice, and it's a really beautiful time, but it's such a dangerous time. And this poem, "The Breast," which if anyone's listening to this, I encourage. I won't read the whole thing, but it's a wonderful poem. And it starts, "This is the key to it. This is the key to everything, preciously." It's about those passions and about being a woman and not quite being able to control your passions. And that's what unfolded for me in the novel. Again, not based on reality, but something tells me, there was passion in that house. And so I really love that poem, and I felt like it set the tone for this story that I wrote.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a part at the end in the novel, Taz talks about hysteria and sort of the origin of the word and what it meant to her. So because in this story there is quite a lot of there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of lack of control. So
Yeah, it took me a long time to recognize those last two lines because it seemed kind of crass to talk about money burning, and it took me a while to figure out that money doesn't burn. It's a different process. Money gets spent, but it's burnt. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
Which is basically the crux of the poem, but it doesn't sound right because it uses the word money. But no, when I was the age we're talking about, yeah, I was a candle burning at both ends, which is kind of what this is, and I should have burned out. If I hadn't have met somebody who salvaged me out of it, that's probably what would have happened.
You're lucky.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I owe a lot of people a lot because of it. But at the same time, there's this perverse thing that in me that says, you know what? It might have been better to be like, I don't know, Jim Morrison or Jimi Hendrix, because you are at the height of your powers, or Baudelaire or Rimbaud or any of those guys that died when they were young, or Joan of Arc. I mean, you're doing something that it's the thing that it's the greatest thing you're going to ever do. It's in many cases, and it's heroic and it's courageous and it's fascinating and it's way out there. And there is that part of you that says, maybe now would be like Kurt Cobain, for example. Maybe now's the time to check out. And people do feel that way, and Anne Sexton felt that way all her life, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I know. I love reading about her life and how she used to, how she and Sylvia Plath and Robert Lowell had have drinks. I just sort of, as I said, it's my hobby. I love reading about that and their letters.
And plus, and then Anne Sexton had all these affairs, like these constant affairs. And that goes, and that goes back to like what they were saying, whether you were saying, and I can't remember which book it was, what Amanda saying, or your fictional character saying, it's not just about having sex with one boy, it's about having sex with a bunch of them.
Right.
Here we are, we can do whatever we want. This is where we're going to figure out how things work, whether it's drugs or whether it's boys or whether it's just going to bars every night and having a blast.
Right.
And,
Yeah, no, there is an interesting aspect of sexual freedom in this book and in this case, because she, Amanda Knox, has been vilified for, just having sex, and it's actually, it's a wonderful thing when one is young and has control of one's body and can if you feel like that's a moral choice you want to, everyone needs to be true to themselves, right? But we have the freedom now as American women, definitely not all over the world, which is what I think this case really showed, but we have the freedom, we have sexual freedom, and in general we're not judged for that, whereas internationally that's not the case, and I think that was another mark against her, and she's been very, I think that she's been very smart and brave about talking about how she's been.
I think so too.
Yeah.
It's funny though when you think about it, not to wax metaphysical on this thing, but if Anne Sexton is saying she's unbalanced, but she's not too worried about being unbalanced, and she doesn't think it's that bad a thing. Do you think that this unbalanced, it's not being crazy, it's being, what is it? What does it mean, to be unbalanced? Shouldn't you always be kind of, should you always be comfortable in life,
Well, I think later one does get, this woman that is speaking, balance does come, and when you are, but, the very young are not, and that's one of the wonderful, there's that restlessness, not quite, you want everything to be settled. Is everything going to be okay? But, you also don't, because once things are settled, it's so boring, right? So, I think being unbalanced is a wonderful thing, especially when you're, in your teens and 20s. Now, if you're my age and unbalanced, that's when things get a little bit tough. I think Anne Sexton was, I don't think she was too young when the actual event occurred in the garage. But, I think if unbalance follows you into your, sort of midlife, that's when the problems really can occur. But again, I mean, this book is it's about the madness of youth, so that's a different topic. But maybe my next book will be about the madness of middle age. Well, that just doesn't sound as fun, does it?
Or if I could write it, would be the madness of being old and weird. I mean,
right.
I feel totally unbalanced, and I'm 62.
I'm so unbalanced, but I have no coffee afternoon, no alcohol before 5.
Well, that's okay. I mean, it is normal, but I mean, when I went to college, this one kid told me, don't ever become comfortable and risk your life every day. I actually think it's kind of good advice.
That is good. Risk your life every day.
Yep.
That is pretty good advice.
We would walk on these parapet walls that were covered with ice, and he would just take me to these things where you knew. And it's like look at all these kids where the mothers and fathers have to watch their sons do rock climbing where one misstep and they're dead, or do the X Games or something like that. And they're doing that same thing. They're hung out there so completely that if they do anything wrong, they will die. Mm-hmm. But that's what they want to do.
Yeah, terrifying. Julie Glass, who read an early draft of this, she's one of my favorite writers.
I interviewed her too.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that, and I listened to it, and it was great. And she's so smart and wonderful. And she said, when she read my book, she was like, I love it, but she's like, my children will never study abroad.
Yeah, I know that. You know how many people I've heard say that after reading these books? And that's a shame, because
I don't think she was serious, but it was just a funny,
Well,
it would be a shame, of course.
It's like a Jaws thing, how people would never go back into I won't go back into the water. It's like that.
I know.
It's like, how many shark attacks are there a year? And,
right.
When I was when I was in the Amalfi Coast, I felt very comfortable. But when I decided to drive all the way across Costa Rica, there were times that I was thinking, oh, this was not such a good idea.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, there's lots of, what's really interesting now is how in college, I wish it wasn't when I was in college, but all these college curricula, it's like, we're going to go to Europe, we're going to go to 20 countries, and that'll be your college curriculum for this year. And I have friends who are in their 20s that have been to like more countries than I have. And it's a wonderful thing, and they are, I guess, chaperoned, or but it would be a shame if people thought because of Perugia, maybe they've lost a lot of tourist trade. Who knows? Have they?
A lot of tourists in Perugia? No, it is a huge college town. There's like 40,000 university students, and there is the University for Foreigners, which is actually started by Mussolini in order to show off Italian culture. So he built this beautiful university where that invited foreigners to come learn, and it's still there. And you can still, obviously it's still there. That's where Amanda Knox was going. But you can take Italian for not very much money. You can learn about the culture. They have all sorts of great classes. So Perugia is a college town, and there is a great tradition of foreigners going there. And unfortunately, the foreigners don't always act, very well. So there's a sort of contention between the town and foreign students. There has been for many, many years, because when you study abroad, you're not becoming a giving member of the community. You're there. You're spending money, which is terrific, but to go somewhere for 9 months and then leave, it's not committing to a place. So it creates an interesting dynamic. So Perusians, I think, they depend on foreign students, but they're very wary of them. It's sort of so this is a town where it's a huge party town, and it's different than Florence or Rome, where there's so much else going on. Perugia really is a place where thousands of young people come to get an education and to have a good time, and it's a beautiful city, but it has kind of a dangerous tone as opposed to sort of Siena,
I love Siena.
I love Siena, and I love Perugia too. I love it, but it's seedy. There's a lot of a lot of drugs. There's sex trade.
Yeah, and you make that
Easier to
you
get
make
in
that
trouble there.
yeah, and you make that clear in the book. Not only seedy in that sense, but seedy in what what Meredith was expecting in terms of, this beautiful landscape and that kind of thing.
Yeah, or yeah. I mean, right.
But
Yeah.
it's like townies in a university town where there's the kids who live in town and they don't like the kids who go to the university. It's kind of like that in a way.
It's like that. Well, and I also, I have some Peruvian friends. I have a really good Peruvian friend who his family was, multi-generation Peruvian, and there's also, the young men like to date the foreigners because they leave.
Yeah.
So that's, it's not. I don't think there's a town. Well, there's a towny vibe amongst the, sort of older families, but certainly the young people, I think, they like all the young foreign Swedes. But if you go the town square, they have this cathedral and the palace, and there's these huge steps, and they call it the living room of Perugia. Literally, there are, I would say, like just hundreds of students sitting on the steps on a summer night, drinking, smoking. I mean, it's like nothing I had ever seen, and maybe thousands. It was almost like being in spring break. I mean, it was like in Trastevere in Rome, that sort of same vibe, but even like more young. So.
Yeah, it's true. It's almost like you expect what's going to happen. I mean, young American women like young Italian men, and they like to have them as conquests when they go back to the United States and talk about them. So it's a two-way street, and there's really nothing stopping. There's no impediment to hooking up, and and that's unfortunately gives rise to some of the things that may or may not have happened here.
Right.
So like, okay, so you have your two very successful books, and you have your two, at least, is it two young adult books now? You've written a second.
I wrote two young adult books.
So this is kind of strange for you to do. There must have been a real reason. I still don't think I got the real reason from you, but I don't know. It's just like it's such a departure for you,
It is a huge departure. Well, the reason was there was a voice in my head, a narrator, very strong narrator, and I was actually working on something else. I was working on the novel that I'm writing now, which is again that book is set in the United States, and mostly half in South Carolina. I'm from the South, so mostly I write. A lot of my settings are Southern, and we were in Italy, and I started reading about the history and studying the history, and I started actually a historical fiction book, which was just awful. and then I was sucked into this sort of Amanda Knox rabbit hole. I mean, I did cover the case for Salon and Slate, which was nice, so I could I was able to parlay my interest into a little tiny bit of money at the time. But the narrative voice, when you have a narrator in your head that just keeps talking and talking, as a novelist, the thing to do is to listen and drop everything and keep going, And so I had that, and I think I rewrote this book 8 times, and I had different things happen in the end, different, the murder didn't happen the way it was in one version. I really rewrote it a lot because I was trying to just get the right notes for this particular novel. And
it must be wonderful to have that. I mean, I wish I had that. I mean, I can write exposition and I can kind of write narrative. I don't have the narrator telling me what the story is.
I don't always either. And so that's why.
Really?
No. I mean, my first book is essentially a book of stories, and then the second book, I think I changed the narrator in Men and Dogs. I think I changed it 3 times. I mean, I'm, still trying to figure this out. I mean, this is book number 5, but I'm sure I'll be trying to figure out. It's just a bunch of different tricks. You're just trying to like juggle the plate until you make it to the next chapter, and you're like, okay, this works. But this narrator was very, very strong, and I just knew what she was doing. I could, maybe because it was preordained, it was something that I was shadowing a real life, So that
Right.
that probably helped. But the voice itself is, I don't know who Meredith Kercher was. I know what she looked like, and I knew what she studied, but this voice was something else and something very strong. And so I need to drop everything and write this and just finish this book because, when you hit a gold mine like that, a narrative voice that's that strong.
And it is, it's like we were talking about. It is very different. It's a different kind of book, and it's in some ways it's one of a kind because I've never read a book that I can't explain it. I've never read a book in which something's going on. You know what? I guess it is. It's because, as you could tell from the minute one of this interview, that I have such a strong opinion that it's really hard for me to become unbiased for even a moment. Mm-hmm. And that's the difficulty I have. Mm-hmm. Although the book was great, what I'm saying is it's just really hard for me to come at it and, I guess, simply to suspend disbelief, Mm-hmm. But
yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, but do you feel like that with every, whenever you read historical fiction or true crime?
No. Although I do feel like there's part of me that goes, oh, I know these people never said these words. There is always a part of me that says that.
Yeah.
And I can't help that. But
yes.
it never bothers me, but it's always in the back of my head. I know they didn't say that because no one knows what they said, and no one really knows what they thought. But I love the idea of reading about Eleanor of Aquitaine. I forgot the lady who writes books only about Eleanor of Aquitaine. But yeah, I mean, I love reading stuff. It's like Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah, or Hilary Mantel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Although those are so hard to read. God, I mean, for me anyway.
Really? I love them. A book that helped me a lot with this book was Curtis Sittenfeld's American Wife.
That's popular at our bookstore.
It is. Well, yeah, it's a great.
It's like
really good, and it's about a person that's alive, but she made that voice wholly her own. And so when I was doing this in the middle of it, as I said, I would be like, oh, can I do this? And my colleagues would give me books that, yes, you can. Look at this book. Look at this book. And it was really like can I write from the grave? And I was like, please give me something other than a lovely bones to help me with this. And so I have a lot of writer friends. They would say, well, go read As I Lay Dying, or go read Sunset Boulevard. Of course you can do this.
Yeah.
It's fine. You can do whatever you want, Katie. You're a fiction writer.
Yeah, that's right. You can say whatever you want. There's no problem with it. I have a problem with that too. It'd be like being a stand-up comedian and doing the same act every night. That drives me nuts. I would feel so horrible having to do the same thing every night. I would feel like I was cheating. I'd want to do a new one.
Retelling the same joke? That would be really hard, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Anyway, this has been fascinating. I'm sorry if I it seems like I was hard on you in a way. I didn't mean to be at all.
Oh my gosh. I thought this was great.
Oh,
I can take it.
Yeah, you can. I could tell just from that little trailer that we were talking about in the beginning. There was something about you that was just, you can tell. So anyway, yeah, the next time you write, I would love to talk to you again. And when your new novel is done, if you want to come back, that would be great. I
would love to. I really think that you are a great interviewer. I listen to a lot of your podcasts.
Oh, well, thanks so much.
And yeah, you're a very smart reader, and you ask great questions. So I've really enjoyed this hour. Thank you.
So did I. Okay, we'll talk soon then.
Okay, bye-bye.
So, Katie Crouch talking about Abroad, and I was kind of hard on her too, but wow, it's amazing that she listens to my podcast and likes them. You guys should do that too. Anyway, so next week we're going to have, this is, for me, it was fascinating, Kevin Birmingham, who wrote this book called The Most Dangerous Book, The Battle for James Joyce Ulysses, which is like tons of research. And what it is, and you can read Judge what's his name? Judge Morris's opinion of Ulysses not being obscene, because it's appended to every edition of Ulysses that Random House has ever issued. And so what's the story of is setting it up so that there could be a trial, so that America could determine for once and for all whether a classic written in a modern sense would be obscene in America given certain parts that were really, really graphic. And so he makes use of newspaper reports, court documents, letters, the existing Jewish biographies, and it's a very good analysis of one of, if not the most important books of the 20th century. So I look forward very much, since it's one of my favorite books, I look forward very much to talking with Kevin Birmingham to discuss his new work, The Most Dangerous Book, The Battle for James Joyce Ulysses. Join us next week.
You've been listening to the Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will be back next week with reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today.